Hello and welcome to Sonic Bytes, the freewheeling conversation and interview series for the eclectic music lover. This week we have part one of a two-part conversation with a very special musical guest, violinist, violist and close friend Min Seo. From discussing the importance of music exams and grades to revelling in the virtuosity and expression that can be achieved on both the violin and the viola, we compare and contrast the listening, learning and enjoyment of classical music as opposed to more contemporary styles and genres. As always, if you're enjoying the podcast, it would mean the absolute world to us, so you could follow us on Apple, Spotify or Stitcher, or subscribe to us on YouTube, as it really goes a long way to helping support the channel and allows us to make even more freewheeling content. I hope you enjoy it.
Anyway, I guess we should welcome Min to the podcast.
Yes, thank you so much for coming on.
Great to be
friend
here.
Min, not Min Seo, the K-pop artist. This is another Min Seo.
Yeah, just call me Min.
Just call
Min.
me.
Yeah,
You can call me Min.
Famous enough not to need a surname.
yeah. It's like Cher and
Prince.
Beyonce.
Yeah, Prince, MJ, Min.
Min. There we go.
Is this going to be a theme on the podcast?
Yeah.
Now?
The trifecta thing.
Different trifactors.
I guess one thing I'd be really interested to know about, obviously having spent a lot of time with Johnny, who to me is sort of like...
I mean, I guess we should introduce Min first, as in who he...
Yeah. That might be good.
In terms of, I guess Min, we've invited you onto the podcast because you're a violinist, much like I am, and I think there's a lot of perspective. I guess because we want to talk about sort of growing up as a musician and learning how to play music and how that differs, and between someone learning like acoustic guitar or another instrument. So like I guess classical versus pop. I guess is that a way to just easily
to an extent, I think I do. Having had a very heavily more classical influences, I think I wanted to kind of have a discussion with you guys, just because it would be really interesting to know about the different things growing up, our kind of musical education and our influences, and as equally a violist as a violinist as well. Just so big up for the viola gang. So I'm excited to start this conversation with you guys. I think we'll learn a lot.
I'm really excited. One thing I'd be really interested to hear about from you is sort of what a heavily classical influence upbringing kind of looks like. Me being sort of the complete opposite of that, having very little exposure to classical music, kind of like how you sort of arrived at where you are kind of now, and sort of where you, what was your first sort of like memory of classical music, I guess?
Well, I think classical music has a very certain cultural significance in Asia.
Yeah.
It's this Western kind of bourgeoisie kind of hobby that everyone kind of, if you're more educated, more cultured, you listen to classical music, and I think that's kind of embedded within the culture of this kind of Western idolization. So I think my mum also just raising me and my sister wanted us to listen to classical music and but not force it upon us. If we enjoy it, she would keep playing it, and she would take us to kind of concerts. I guess not kind of grand concerts in concert halls and theatres. She'd go to like a lot of violin teachers and piano teachers. They'll put a little recital on. So I guess recitals for kids our age and older, and just take us round to see if we were interested in any of the instruments that people were playing. So I guess one of my first kind of ins into classical music was going to these recitals, seeing someone who looks like me or who is around a similar age playing a certain instrument was a way for me to either want to play it or not want to play it. So
and was that in the local area?
Yeah.
In London?
So there are loads of there's loads of music teachers. I mean, everyone's a music teacher around wherever you live. There's always a music teacher somewhere. And my mum managed to find, just through networks around the kind of local neighbourhood, this wonderful man called George Stevens, who eventually became my first violin teacher, he holds a recital every term with all his students.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, so every student has solo lessons, where they just learn the instrument by itself, and they always have a kind of ensemble chamber music lesson with him, and they put on a solo and a chamber music recital every term, which I thought was brilliant. At the time, I didn't know that, but later on, kind of reflecting on it, that's such a brilliant way to teach kids about performing and everything. And so my mum took me to one of those, and I saw this. I think he must have been about kind of early teens, like 13, 14-year-old kind of this Korean guy playing the violin. And according to my mum, I listened to him and I was like, I want to be like that guy. I want to play the violin. And that's the only way my mum wanted both me and my sister to get into music in the first place, to actually want to do it.
Yeah.
And everything else that we did in our life, like sports or arts, everything, she'd make us, we would try it. And if we did like it, then she would further our education into it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I got into violin. And we would also play classical albums in the car.
Yes.
So there are loads of kind of playlists and kind of CD playlists and mixes that we would play. And I don't know, naturally my sister and I would kind of have some Mozart bangers on.
Yeah.
And, you know, like how everyone sings along to a normal pop tune, we would sing along to the melody or like the string parts of it. And
yeah,
we're just kind of
it's
bop on it.
it's quite interesting. I think so because I started learning violin and piano first as well through a classical upbringing, and I think it's quite interesting how classical music has a lot of like schools and sort of organizations that you can learn through, whereas with guitar, I mean, you can go to like a guitar school, but it's
like rock guitar school,
like a rock school, and yeah, like those things do exist, but they're not like established in a way that like these sorts of classical clubs, I'd say, give you an entry point, like an easy entry point for kids to start learning classical music. And it's I don't know, it's just so different.
I think there's a definitely like historical and also kind of maybe music philosophy behind it, or just again the history and the culture of classical music, and the fact that there is this system of education and learning in throughout Western culture. So that's why you have organizations and establishments about classical music and of classical music, which is easier to get into. Whereas the more contemporary kind of, like you say, guitars and drums, the more kind of band music stuff is, I guess, not seen in the same way.
No, absolutely. I guess even historically, I guess, because a lot of the sort of the classical instruments, in the way that the classical instruments are played, you know, if you take like a classical guitar versus like a steel string guitar, they've been around for so much longer, so the infrastructure sort of it's had a chance to build up over time.
Exactly.
And it has that kind of, as you said, it has like a cultural history sort of embedded within Western culture, sort of all the way back into the 1600s. Whereas I think a lot of modern instruments, because of the way they're amplified and the way they've kind of come about, like especially the electric guitar and sort of synth pianos, they don't necessarily sound like anything that's come before either. And so the history of the electric guitar, for example, is only been around since sort of the 1940s. So it's only about 80 years old. And so you don't
in the
have
context of the whole musical history.
Yeah, in the context of everything, it's very, very young. And so I guess you don't have that sort of like, there's not like an electrical guitar conservatoire that you can go to in the same way as you can go to like a conservatoire for classical music.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there are, but they aren't as like prestigious, I guess. You have Berkeley, you have New England Conservatoire, actually that's more classical, but you have like MI on the West Coast.
Guildford as well, ACM, sorry, the Academy of Contemporary Music in Guildford. And there's a lot of like upcoming like BIM, and I think there's the college in Leeds is also like in terms of contemporary music, but compared to like the establishments of like RAM, RCM, Trinity, you know, in the UK and in the US, you have like Juilliard, Curtis, like all these like crazy prestigious schools where like all these virtuosos have all gone through. To have gone to Juilliard as a violinist, you know, like it's one of those things that, like if you said that to any, how do you even put that into words, you know? Like if you said like, oh, like my daughter or son went to Juilliard, that's a huge thing, you know. It's considered like a pinnacle of musical achievement up to that point where you get to learn from the most prestigious teachers in the world who are
academics almost at those at those institutions. So you have this type of like historic infrastructure to it, which I guess comes like it comes part and parcel with the fact that it is, I guess, pre-modern music, like classical music,
yeah,
and stuff like that.
I guess also it has that kind of like because the pieces has been around for so long as well. You have that sort of history of there are just more generations having sort of learned, a given violin or piano piece, and then transferring it onto the next sort of teacher-student kind of thing. So like at least in terms of playing electric guitar or acoustic, sort of pop acoustic guitar, there aren't sort of like acoustic guitar standards that you can learn in the same way as you can learn, sort of violin. Is it? No, it's not Paganini, is it? Is it Paganini?
I mean, Paganini is probably not something you'd start learning, but it's like it is part of the
maybe
the
for those child
repertoire.
prodigies, but
I guess when you first start, there's I feel like the difference between like a stark difference between guitar. Yeah, again, is to go to that standards thing.
Yeah,
there's such there's such a structure and a methodology to it. Like you start off with like your little Suzuki violin books.
Exactly.
And you have these, like, you always learn Twinkle Twinkle Little Star first on the violin. It's one of those things where why would you play that on the guitar? On the guitar,
exactly.
You would play. Oh, something's changed. This is a new setup, by the way. If you hadn't noticed, if you're just listening to the podcast, we're actually filming a podcast live in person for the first time, which is quite interesting and very different. So if you notice any differences, in even just the way we can play off each other now, it's going to be
exactly.
And luckily,
and for the YouTube watchers, we've attempted to have the Sonic Bytes logo, and for the Spotify people as well, we've attempted to have a logo on Johnny's TV, and it's just switched itself off very kindly. So now we've got a nice background of some mountains instead.
We tried.
That's a good point actually though, and what's kind of interesting about a lot of sort of advanced electric guitar stuff is that it actually borrows very heavily from classical music, and it almost becomes a challenge, at least in a lot of courses that are offered or that I've seen advertised. There's a guy called Dan Mum who offers like a classical guitar course where he basically plays a load of sort of Paganini-esque stuff on the violin, sort of with fret tapping. Sorry, on the guitar, the electric guitar with sort of fret tapping and sort of like in order to mimic a violin, to sort of have that level of like the level of like coordination and virtuosity is actually like it's when you get to a certain level on guitar, it's almost like violin then becomes the thing to start imitating.
It's like
it's
like neoclassical.
Yeah,
it's like
that's exactly
it. Like proven the test of time. It's like a prestigious piece of music.
That's exactly
requires like loads of skill to be able to pull it off. Like I think it's. And then I guess the method for learning violin, I mean, it is you start. I guess the group culture also plays a part in it. I'd say because I guess you have. I mean, you can just learn to be a soloist, but you probably wouldn't be having a. I mean, this is quite specific to violin but in violins, I think a lot of what you learn is also playing in a group. So like playing chamber music or playing in orchestra. It's like you can't just learn violin solo pieces, but you wouldn't be able to be accompanied or have the interaction with another instrument in the same field. I mean, it's such a broad topic, but it's like, how do you even?
So I mean, like you said, we are talking something very string specific. So for example, if you learn the piano, like both I have and you have. You just learn how to play the piano by yourself. You don't have to get another pianist in and do some duets. You know? You don't have your piano teacher rolling in their piano to your house to practice piano chamber music with you. But with strings, definitely, like even starting out, even the lessons, I started out for the first few months. I didn't even have to have a violin. I didn't even touch a violin or even see one. It was we had I guess. It's different because you're starting out as that young. So I started when I was 6. So when you're that young, these steps are more important. I guess if you're older, you might easily start off with the violin. Whereas when you're that young, it's about the music first. So we learned the whole do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do kind of thing with all the hand gestures. Wait, do you know about the hand
No,
gestures?
no, please.
So from
This is all new to me.
from do to T, you have all these hand gestures of there's a name for this, which
Solfege, is it?
Yeah, solfege.
Solfege.
Yeah, I came across on 2 set. I just never thought it had a name, but yeah. So you have these. I guess if you just listen to it, it's not that fun. But you do a fist for do.
Okay.
Then you have a slanted kind of straight hand for
Does it have to
re.
be right hand or is it?
It doesn't matter
Okay.
which hand it is. So you have a fist, and then you have a slanted right hand for re, and then mi is a flat hand. Fa is like kind of like an enchanté kind of hand.
Okay.
Fa. So is like a shield in front of you,
Yeah.
and then la is what's la? Do re mi fa. So
T.
so T is a point. T is like a you're just
Yeah.
pointing in the air. I think I got re and la maybe mixed up, but you basically have these hand gestures.
That's so
And
cool.
so you start off with learning all these kind of these very basic songs, kind of nursery songs, basically.
Yeah.
Like hot cross buns and all those
Yeah.
things. My teacher would teach me these songs using the hand gestures, kind of
Yeah.
like do re mi fa, and then and then putting the words, the lyrics into
Yeah.
it,
It's like
and then
hot
later
cross
on,
buns.
yeah, exactly.
That's
And
so
then
cool.
later on, he would just do the gestures, and we had to sing along to the song just looking at his hand gestures.
That's amazing.
And then you get to Ferry Jacko, where you have obviously 2 different hand gestures at the same time, where where one group starts and the other group starts after the first verse.
Oh my god, that's amazing.
So you kind of learn about very basic music theory on how intonation works, how pitch works. Through a visual cue, basically, you're learning that the lower it is, the lower the pitch. The higher it is, the higher the pitch.
Yeah.
And you do it physically with your hand, but going up and going down, and you make this association. And I think that definitely helps later when you start to learn sheet music, because the kind of the dots on your staves kind of go up for higher pitch and go lower for lower pitches. So you make this association to help you understand the theory of classical education of music, or of reading sheet music, etc. So I think that's very interesting that you don't. I guess I don't know. I never learnt guitar or anything like that, but I've never heard of anyone kind of go into music in that way.
Yeah, you just sort of like pick up the guitar and just try and
You just start, yeah.
like we've taught guitar, I guess, try to at the beginning, like just beginners, and you literally just tell them like just put the finger here and then just like just play a chord, and it just I guess it plays itself. With the violin, I guess there's the whole kind of the funny I guess not stereotype but convention of like people learning to play violin and it sounding horrible at the beginning.
I mean, it does. It sounds absolutely horrible.
Yeah.
And it's credit to every parent in the world who sticks with their children learning violin at least up to grade 5.
Yeah.
Because it's the worst. That and the recorder
Yeah.
are like some of the worst sounds you can ever hear.
Yeah, whereas even with piano, like you can just play it, I guess.
I mean,
at the
Yeah.
beginning.
There's only so wrong you can kind of do.
It's
with the
tuned
piano,
for
isn't
you.
there?
It's the whole argument of
Like just playing a note. Like literally just the whole process of
But
playing
just getting
a
a
note.
note out is
Whether you're playing lyrically or not, or
Yeah.
well or not, that's a different thing.
because that's also important because I don't know if this is something that my mum heard from kind of people who start out kind of teaching their kids music. She stressed the importance of learning piano first.
Yes.
So I kind of learnt piano violin at the same time, but in terms of obviously picking up the instrument, with piano you start on the piano itself. With violin, like I said, I started with kind of the theory of it.
Yeah.
But those two combined I think that's nearly every classical musician have learnt the piano in some way. Because of this kind of, I don't know, maybe it's a well-known thing that you have to learn piano just to get used to the whole relationship.
You don't
between
question
notes.
it at all.
No, you don't question it at all. It's
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, sure, because the tone, everything's pre-tuned for you in a way.
Yeah.
And you just learn the relationship between notes. And it's just easier to understand when you can hear the sounds that you're supposed to hear. Whereas obviously with a lot of other instruments, you need to make the sound yourself, and you
Yeah.
don't know whether you're right or wrong because you have no frame of reference.
Yeah, it's like imagine learning to play like an oboe or like another or like
Yeah,
a clarinet
exactly.
and like or a flute even.
Yeah,
you're even just to create the note.
it's hard
sounds
enough.
good,
Yeah,
you know?
I think the other thing about piano, I did the same thing. So before learning guitar, I had piano lessons for about 5 years, from 11 to 16. And it gives you it's like a one-to-one visual representation of what music is. You know, that's if you see it like any interval, you can literally see like how far it is away from the other note, which is really helpful for me. And it helped me in terms of just having a sort of bastardized version of musical theory to move on to guitar as well. Just to be able to look and say like, and just to be able to my piano teacher and I, we disagreed on a lot of things. But like one of the things that I really remember him teaching me was the difference between a major and a minor chord. And like he was literally like, so he'd start on a C and he'd go like 1 2 3 4 5 1 2 3 4, and then he's like that's a major chord, and then 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 5, that was a minor chord. And so just the difference between a major and a minor third helped me obviously work out all the other chords and and all the other keys and things like that. But even now to this day, when I think in terms of like what I picture in my head when I picture music, I picture a piano. If I picture notes and sort of moving between intervals and things, like it's the piano in my head that does that as opposed to the guitar. So I think like having that sort of having piano as a basic instrument, like regardless of where you are, I think it's so helpful.
And I guess that speaks to how important that initial learning of an instrument or music is, to everything else that you interpret. You know? It's like you definitely have like the way that you have classical musician approaching pop music, the way that like Nari Soul on YouTube might be explaining, or the vice versa, like a pop musician trying to learn how classical music works. It like everything you base is off that. It's like learning a language, like
you still have the same structures, you just and then you just apply that in different ways. So I think it's we kind of found a commonality between any musicians is having a basis to start with, and apparently piano is that basis. That's we start off the same. It's just you just go through different routes.
In different directions.
And I guess it speaks to if that is such an important thing, then also I guess that intro has to be diverse in a way as well. It has to. I guess if you try and learn like classical music, whatever that means, like I guess like Western European music, then it has to like it shouldn't be treated as like the right way to play music.
No, not at all. I mean, to be fair, even with starting with the piano thing, is it again? This is the Western way of
the
Western music way.
It's a way to it's a way to look at music,
Yeah, but then if you go to Japanese, Korean musical history, Latin American, the way they start out might be completely different. It might be completely by ear, for example. But I guess us growing up in similar environments to an extent. Piano is a commonality between us.
Yes.
Definitely. We found something in common.
In common.
Look at us.
Just like
we
that.
can be friends.
And I think also what's interesting as well is I feel like in the classical world there is a lot of emphasis on like grades and stuff like that. It is. I mean, you don't have to, and I think it is. I guess to classical musicians, it is seen as something that's just like, oh, you just do your grades. And
Well, to be fair, I mean, obviously,
I don't know what your experience is.
I thought that too, but I think that's only because we grew up in a British colonial classical music education system.
Sure.
But obviously, you have grades in England, you have grades in Hong Kong because of the British system.
Yeah, I mean, it is pretty much it's ABRSM.
It's ABRSM. It's just
Trinity,
ABRSM. And then in Australia, they have their own version, but they do have grades as well. But beyond that, I mean, Korea doesn't have grades. I mean, although my kind of non-Western reference will be Korean, just because.
Sure.
Yeah, that's what I know best after the British kind of culture. And you don't have grades. You have practice books, guides, kind of at different levels that you go through. And kind of if you complete these books, you have kind of mastered the basics of to a certain extent. And then you just kind of go into pieces and everything and doing recitals as a way of growing than doing grades as a way of kind of growing.
Yeah.
So I think, like Johnny said, I also thought it's just grades. Let's get to the highest kind of amateur grade, which is grade 8.
Yeah.
Whereas it will be different depending on where you come from.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the culture as well. I think in Hong Kong, the classical music culture is very much like grades are seen as as symbols of how well you've achieved, and
Yeah.
like whether you can get into an orchestra or if you get into the Academy of Music in Hong Kong. It's like you have to achieve these certain grades.
Well, it's a qualification. It's,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just like taking exams in
Yeah.
GCSEs and A levels or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a way to measure it, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess it shouldn't be like a true indicator, but it's just something for you to have to just say you've achieved it. You get
It's like a standard that like to know you're at kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
something.
Well, it's the same way that going to universities and everything is the same way you doing grades and everything. It's just a different way of thinking.
Yeah,
A different way of measuring. But yeah, I mean, grades are. You grow up thinking grades are the most important things in the world when you're learning a classical instrument.
Yeah.
I guess it is a way for you as a child.
Yeah.
Before you've learned how to be an adult, it's something for you to strive for and achieve.
Yeah.
So it helps you, I guess, guide and maybe work a bit harder than you might, like if you didn't have the like a natural inclination to just love music from the onset. Like growing up for me as a classical musician as a kid, I was quite lazy. There was like a few years of my life where I just absolutely hated it. It was like I can visibly remember myself just doing it because it was the thing that I was doing like routine every week. I have a lesson, I have a violin lesson, and I have a piano lesson every week, and I have to. I had literally just had to do it, and so
there's definitely something wrong with you as a kid if you actually do. If you never hate it, you have to hate it at one period of your life.
Yeah, and then you sort of grow to like it. It just becomes part of your life. Yeah. Like there is a point where you're suddenly like, oh, actually, this is good. And when you, I guess when you get better, when you start learning, when you get better, you're actually able to play pieces to a listenable standard.
Did you have a moment? Did you have a moment where, from this point onwards, you were doing it in part because you enjoyed it? Because I definitely have a moment.
For me, it was probably when I started playing more in groups. I went through quite a system education of classical music, like being in a school and then going to the Hong Kong Academy of Music, like on the junior program. And so there was quite a system to that. You have like a lesson, then you have like a theory group lessons at the same time. But it was when I started playing in like ensembles and orchestras, that was when that unlocked big. I guess maybe because I wasn't relying on myself to create the entire beautiful piece of music. Whereas if you just sit in an orchestra, even if you're not playing like amazingly, you can still be part of like a larger achievement, a group achievement. And that's when it clicked for me, and then that sort of inspired me to play more and practice a bit more. Even though I still had little lazy periods. But
when was your moment?
It was literally
last week.
Yeah, literally last week. I hated it.
I was like, they were like, oh, I got to go on this podcast and talk about classical music. So I was like,
I forced myself to enjoy it. I bloody hate music. No, I think it was literally whilst I was preparing for my grade 5. So it's the grades is just a way of remembering a time in my musical life. It doesn't mean anything, but when I was preparing for my grade 5, I realized a lot of the pieces now that I was learning, I can kind of play without having to think too much about it. It's when my sight reading started to get much better, when a lot of the pieces of music that my teacher would put in front of me, I can easily sight read, and after a few kind of playthroughs, I can play the notes of the piece. I wouldn't say I can play the piece, I can play the notes and have the right I can play the right notes, which is I guess the first important thing of playing.
Which, like, as someone who can't sight read, that is like, that blows my mind.
So I think as soon as my sight reading got to a certain level, and then my playing got to a certain level where I didn't feel like there were many pieces that can hold me back. It was whatever piece was in front of me, I knew that if I practice a bit, I can play it, and from that moment I can easily enjoy it because I didn't have to think. I didn't have all these thoughts in my head going, how do I play that bit? How am I going to do that bit? I mean, how do I even begin to approach this section? It was more like, okay, if I do it, if I kind of write the fingerings for that bit, if I kind of save my bow and play in that much in this other section, maybe I can play that. I can easily kind of just in my head, I have a mental picture of how I was going to play the music, and from then on I can easily enjoy it, which was kind of a revelation, because I hated practicing. I hated everything to do with not to do with taking grade exams, because I loved getting the results.
Yeah.
That's all I craved for before this moment. And from then on I was like, I was looking up pieces. I was looking at pieces that I've heard I wanted to play and stuff.
Yeah.
I guess with sheet music, there is a thrill of buying a new
yeah.
piece of sheet music. I mean, I guess nowadays you have imslp.org where you can literally download any piece of sheet music ever for free. There is a thrill of going to the, I don't know what the shop is in London for those type of things.
Blackwell's is probably the
right.
big one.
In Hong Kong we have Tom Lee and Parsons. Any Hong Kong listeners, but my mom. The thrill of like buying a piece of music and then for me going like taking this piece of music to my lesson, to my teacher, and then be like, okay, I'm gonna start to learn this now, and then the teacher will teach it to me. I guess that's it. I guess it varies in different places.
At the library of Mr. George Stevens, my teacher, he's been. I mean, when I started, he was already old. He was already, I think he must have been at least in his 50s when I started music with him, or 60s. So he had a library of music, and he, obviously because he's been going to the same store for ages, he's got a discount, and he goes to the store like every weekend, kind of buying sheet music that he needs for a certain quartet group that he's teaching, or a certain student he's teaching. And for me, it's just going through what he has in his house, basically, and then just taking it home, photocopying it, and then just bringing it back to him, and I just play loads of photocopies of music, which is
that's sweet, man.
Which is it was great. I didn't have to pay for anything.
That's awesome.
Yeah, with and I guess sight reading is woven into the grade structure as well. Like when you do an ABRSM exam, you have your 3 pieces that you learn, and then you have your you have a scales segment where you learn a bunch of scales, and then you show up to the test and you're like, okay, play me a C sharp melodic minor, and you're like, oh crap, C sharp melodic minor, and then you have a sight reading portion where you're literally given this thing on the spot, and then you have this oral test which makes up like 10% of the marks. And that's like, I think that was like quite interesting thinking back on it. I didn't really realize the significance of it at the time, but you're literally played pieces of music and you have to listen out. It's like ear training. You have to, so it's almost like when you're learning guitar, you learn what a E chord is, G chord is. You have to be able to identify like cadences or like different intervals and notes and stuff like that. And I guess at the time I sort of brushed it off. Oh, it's just not 10% of the marks. You do.
Everyone hated the piece playing aspect of grade exams. Because you just want to play your piece. That's all you practice. And the scales and the sight reading and the theory is just stuff you don't want to do. The ABRSM, by the way, for anyone who doesn't know, is the Associated Board of the Royal Schools of Music, which kind of sets the standard for these kind of grades and kind of classical music at least in Britain and across the world actually as well. So there's a great classical music education institution, which most people go through if you're learning classical music in Britain and Hong Kong and other places.
It's just a structure. It's like in the UK you do GCSEs because they're GCSEs, you know.
GCSEs for instruments.
Although I didn't do ABRSM for my violin, and I did Guildhall Music School of Music, and then which turned to Trinity Guildhall. When I did grades 7 and 8. So I did ABRSM on my piano and my viola, and I think ABRSM is definitely harder. So I definitely like cheated my way through my grades. Who cares? Grades don't matter.
Grades don't matter.
I mean, I hope we live in a world where grades don't matter, because it really shouldn't. It is a nice thing to have, and maybe it's motivate you. But again, I mean, however, it's because music is subjective at the end of the day. You know,
I guess it depends what you're striving to achieve as well. Like in terms of music, I think having looked up into guitar tuition and things like that, like a lot of websites will ask sort of what grade you've reached, at guitar, and it's handy just to have something like a piece of paper to say, okay, well, I've reached grade 8 or I've reached grade 5, because it's just something to say, okay, this person's at this level kind of thing. So there's a assumed prerequisite of what that person's able to do kind of thing. I have no grades at all for any music that I've ever played. My fiance, in fact, she's got grade 1 piano, so on paper she's actually a better musician than I am, despite it being my living. But yeah, so it is really interesting, sort of the grade side of it. But I guess, again, like after you get to a certain point, it sort of it expands out, and then
it's an easy way to start out. And I've got a semi-pro violinist friend who is amazing. He's one of in terms of someone I know, someone who I've heard live growing up as a friend. It's the most beautiful player. But after about grade 4 or whatever, that's kind of, it was easy to kind of start off like that, and then he just has normal music lessons, didn't care about grades. It was about preparing for a recital or preparing this piece to a certain standard and playing it. And grades really doesn't matter. And you don't see many professional musicians who give a damn about grades.
I guess if you were to go to Juilliard, then that's more of an indicator of whether you should be in the Berlin Philharmonic or something, than I did I guess with
didn't get my diploma, damn it.
I guess with diplomas it is, after grade 8, after you get to grade 8, you're sort of, I guess, arbitrarily seen to have okay, you don't need to learn much more music theory. And then when you get to the diploma stage of this system of examination, then it becomes more interpretive. You're actually playing pieces in these diploma exams, which are actual more virtuosic pieces,
and it's equally important in those exams to understand the pieces you're playing and why you have played it in a certain way, and understanding the whole kind of the background of the piece and of the composer and everything. So that's when it becomes more serious, I guess, and meaningful.
When I did I did ATCL for both piano and violin, and you have to prepare program notes for it as if you're simulating a concert experience. So I remember that was really fun because I had Microsoft Publisher. remember when that still existed, and I put this violin on the top. And
did you print them out?
I literally had to print. I think that was a prerequisite of the exam. You had to print it out and give it to the examiner, and then he would read and then as you perform the piece in this very air-conditioned room in a music studio in Hong Kong.
It's always cold.
Never
had an exam room that's not cold.
Hong Kong inside.
With the aircon. Which is also a weird physical part of the classical music experience now I think about it. So that's I guess at that point it starts to get more interpretive in the structure, I guess. But I guess for me, I guess we have to speak from personal experience, but I guess with orchestras, the way it sort of liberated my view of classical music was because there was less of a grade structure to it. Being in an orchestra, the only grade is how well you play the piece, subjectively speaking, to an audience, and how the audience will react, I guess, at the end of the piece to it. And I think that for me, that's the magic of classical music. Solo music is great as well, don't get me wrong. But personally, my favorite type of classical music is orchestral. Is chamber music, where it's multiple string instruments or something like that. And that's a whole nother world, I guess. There's some. I've just got. I'm preparing for this podcast. I made a massive list of everything you could talk about.
Point 1.
So I've got method, grades, orchestra, chamber music, choral, schools, university, music theory, things in films, composers. That's half of my list.
The list
Instruments, expectations of players. There's a lot of things we need to note down in our brainstorm.
Which explains how two set violin are just churning up the content, I guess. There's
Those
just
guys.
so much stuff to talk about, and it's all academic.
That opened my eyes so much. I don't know how whether you guys put me onto two-set violin, but however I found it, it's opened my eyes so much just to the world of classical music, and sort of just even just the memes within it are absolutely hilarious. I had no idea that there's this whole feud between violins and viola players, and sort of the violins.
It's a one-way feud. It's definitely a one-way.
There's no talk back there.
It's not a feud. It's bullying. It's assault.
But I if you don't sort of grow up in the classical world, like you just have no idea of that. And so like it was just a whole treasure trove of like hours of content that I was just looking and just laughing my arse off with just hours of these guys just ripping on viola players the whole time. It's so unbelievably funny. And it is a whole world.
I mean, going back to standards, there's also like the whole element of like music competitions. That's a massive thing.
Interesting.
Because you have violin, these like crazy, like Yehudi Mehudin, did I say that right? Like violin competitions, these like prestigious competitions where like the prodigies of the world, like these tiny 8-year-old violinists go in and like absolutely smash it. There's a whole treasure trove of like 8-year-olds like sounding like 50-year-olds.
Yeah, I've seen some of the two-set violin reactions to that. So some of the 12-year-old prodigies playing these pieces, and it is just like absolutely disgusting the way they can play. Like,
no, the friend I mentioned, he went on a music competition in Russia. So he was around, I think he was around 14 at the time, and he came third. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. And then it was like, he came first and second. First was this 8-year-old Chinese girl, and second was a 10-year-old Russian girl, and and he was there as this 14-year-old who's just much bigger, much older, just there kind of next to these tiny people, just kind of getting his bronze prize,
standing on the third podium taller than first and second, like.
And it's one of those, like, it really put classical music and the performance aspect of it into perspective for me personally. Like, I've only ever done maybe like maximum 2 or 3 competitions in my life for classical music. So I played in like a quartet in school, and we went to like this national competition. We just entered it just to see what happens. And you almost go and you don't expect yourself to win at all. Because there's like so many, like as an average classical musician, there's such. I mean, I guess it's the same with guitar. You have these players that are so much better than you, but with classical music, I feel like the hump.
It's so hard to be arrogant in classical music. You're humbled by every single player around you.
The standard is so high for what you can achieve with it. Even though it's like you might think of classical music as it's just sheet music. It's planned. All the interpretation is marked into the score. There's like a way to play it. Whereas and it's that hump, like even now, like I mean I've stopped playing classical music, sadly. Halfway through uni I was just decided to focus more on contemporary music and jazz and pop. But yeah, just even thinking about the amount of work it takes to become the top tier. I mean, I guess it is for all instruments, but for me, I guess because I've experienced classical music all my life, it's a hump that I've had to grapple with all my life. Just like to become the virtuoso is just like you have to have some sort of because people talk about like talent and stuff like that. If you have a natural talent, and I mean it is a bit dumb, the concept, but sometimes it does make sense.
To it,
it's like wow, like some of this is. Like there's just so much interpretive element. There's so much technique, but that's what is amazing about it, I think, as well. I mean, we haven't even mentioned any examples at all, but it's like even just glossing over it, it's such a mountain,
It's weird because every small hump you go over, that's when you realize there are more humps than you thought. Because you weren't even in the right kind of field to understand what else is needed. And that's going to be my life kind of till I die. Always going to be, there'll be one more thing to get over.
Not to put anyone off from learning a classical
but that's a good thing. You don't want to master anything in life. You don't want to be, you don't want to feel like I've achieved it and you just let it go. I mean,
that's it's why it's like a lifelong passion, isn't it, music, and that like it's something that you continue to get better at, but then like the more you learn, the more you realize that you don't know, kind of thing, and it's just like it's ever doing that and getting wider and wider, and sort of
it's like science. The more you know, the less you know.
The more you know, the less you know. Exactly.
And the more humbled you are.
Exactly. One thing I was going to ask both of you guys, actually, obviously, because you both had sort of heavily classical influenced upbringing, is like, what's been your experience going from, like, for example, playing in an orchestra to playing in like a pop band?
Oh God.
And sort of like, how is it, like, how did you sort of deal with it, and what's the kind of like, what are the main differences you guys have like found?
I might leave it to Johnny to be the because I'm more of a hardcore version of going pure classical to bands. So I'll go to Johnny first to be the intermediary. How did you?
Well, the switch. I mean, you play in groups, in chamber groups, and in quartets or in orchestras. I guess if we're talking about groups specifically. I guess in orchestra, as a string player, there's less of you just kind of follow the people around you. There's an element of that. Whereas I guess in pop groups, there's much more of an emphasis on this solo aspect of it. Like you have your own place in the mix.
I think a better comparison would be chamber music to bands.
That's true.
You don't have a leader to conduct, and you all doing it with each other.
Yeah. It's weird. I guess the nature of the pieces that are being played is very different. In a quartet, it's much more everything's moving. Like I don't want to say pop music isn't moving together, but with pop music, like if I'm playing bass or guitar in a band, let alone violin, I think with violin you kind of just play. I guess when you're in a band. Like you just play your part and then you just get mixed in. But I mean,
I'll hold my tongue until Johnny finishes.
But with bass and guitar, you kind of just play your part, and as long as you're not too loud, as long as you're aware of how you sound, like how you're mixed into the group, as a string player, I guess, in a not contemporary music, non-classical band, then and then you keep time. There's much more of it. Whereas with a quartet, you're much more moving as a unit, I feel. Maybe it's just the music I played, but everything interacts with each other. You're occasionally, just the nature of the music, you're occasionally interacting with the second violin as a first violinist, or with the cello, or you're sitting back to let the cello come through. And it's just so structurally different in playing in a group. And I guess the roles, I would say, are bit more egalitarian apart from violas, of course, but
you need like the buzzing noise of every time.
No, it's just tears.
But in a traditional quartet, I guess violin twos and maybe the violin one player is supposed to have more lead parts, but that's just off the top of my head. I don't know how you have approached it as a.
Got a lot of things to say about that.
Are they qualms, or are they frustrations, or are they kind of interesting?
It's just my interpretation of why it's different and how it's different. It's just so in a quartet, if a composer composing a quartet chamber music, each instrument has there's no instrument that doesn't have a role within that piece of music. Every instrument has almost an equal role in different aspects. So you might have a more of a role in keeping the bass kind of the tonics of the piece, or and you're like Johnny said, you all move together because every player has certain things to play at almost at all times. Even if you have rests, there's a reason why you have rests and the reason why you come in later. But you don't have huge periods of rests in chamber music because every instrument has a role to play. Whereas in bands, the main part is the singer. Or the majority of the times, the singer, the human voice is the main bit, and the main part is the lead. So as soon as you have this a setting where you have one person who's always going to be the lead, everything else is accompaniment. And some accompaniment are more prominent than others, obviously. So with the main electric guitar or a bass, you might have a certain prominent role where you can continuous playing throughout the piece of music, and even as percussion as well. But when you're these kind of bit parts, string parts, flute parts, or whatever that comes in every 70 bars of a piece, it's impossible in terms of using your chamber music training, to know exactly when you're supposed to be coming in, to know exactly what you should be playing as well, I guess, just in terms of the lack of sheet music.
The cues and the environment, and your significance.
There's no cues. There's no sheet music. So in chamber music, cues are you have a lot of eye contact with each other. It's such a huge thing, and the point in which you come in there's a significant reason why you come into that piece in terms of whether it's a melodic or harmonic reason. It's very logical, and you don't even have to know the piece to know kind of when to come in. Whereas in band music, sometimes you just come in because to change the timbre or change the kind of the rhythm or change the kind of the texture of the piece without having real significance on the actual notes themselves. So it's hard to remember the notes because they're so random, and and it's hard to know when to come in because that's also quite random as well.
And I guess I was gonna if you don't mind me interjecting.
Oh no, go for it.
But I guess it's similar to being like a horn player in an orchestra where you, or timpani player, percussion player even, where you're there. There are pieces where like you wait like hundreds of bars and like you look at their scores.
That's me for another 5 minutes.
But at least they have sheet music and a conductor.
Yeah,
whereas you have neither in a band.
Nothing in a band.
And also, I feel like if you're a trumpet player in an orchestra, when you're coming in, you are the main focus of the orchestra at that moment, you know. Whereas if a violin comes, like waits 60 bars just to come in on the pad or on the bridge, then then it's like you're just there and you wait at 60 bars and you're the accompaniment.
And I guess that also leads to kind of expectations of string players in bands where it's not just the whole coming in and playing part, it's the being able to play certain notes with a certain technique is almost as if it's a given.
Yes,
for example, you know, you might have to come in a random part of the piece of music with a lot of kind of staccatos or a lot of textures that you have as part of kind of learning to play the guitar and or the other band instruments. Where with strings they are more advanced techniques that you know, you might need to warm up a bit more. Sometimes you need to practice way more because you don't use it in every piece, for example. So there are little techniques that are, I guess, if you play the same part with a guitar, it might be much easier. Where on a violin, it's so much harder, especially as an amateur. You just want a bit more practice, but then you don't realize you need those techniques until you go to rehearse and you realize, oh, it actually sounds better this way. And I can't just suddenly play it.
It's given talking about this has given me this hilarious image of like a rock band interacting with each other the way a string quartet.
Oh yeah, just like looking into
because there's a lot of movement. You know, like I guess with rock music you have like headbanging movement, but with the string quartets you're more like leaning into each other to get these swells of like emotion thing, and then we're just imagining just like a guitar, just kind of like heavy breathing. It's like,
that's another huge thing. Breathing, like you said, breathing is a huge thing in chamber music and in Stephen solo playing, because unless you're playing Bach or Paganini, solo playing is always with some kind of accompaniment anyway. And breathing and how to breathe and when to breathe is such a huge thing in playing together. That's another thing you don't have you can't hear it.
Not at all.
Like, it's so hard to coordinate in band music.
I watched the
Did you
TED.
breathe? What?
I watched a TED talk recently. You might have seen it before. It's Benjamin Zander.
I talked to Leo ages about Benjamin Zander.
The class. So he's tried to convince the audience that classical music is great, no matter how much knowledge you have about classical music.
Anyone can enjoy it.
And what I found most really striking about his performance, he plays a Chopin nocturne.
I think it's a Chopin nocturne.
At the end, and when he goes in, so he demonstrates like learning when you first start to learn Sonatina by Clementi or Mozart, I think Sonatina, and he goes into like his max like flex mode, Xander flex mode, and the first thing you hear before he even plays a note is. And then he starts playing, and it's like absolutely beautiful. It's breathtaking. Everyone, like, you could hear a pin drop in that room probably.
You're leading the audience in as well when you're doing that. I mean, you kind of it's a cue for them to just start getting into the music and listening. And it's a whole different experience when you have it and don't have it. You don't feel as engaged when you have someone just kind of playing it straight out.
Whereas compared to like you know, you're not going to do that.
I mean, it depends on the mood of the piece, obviously.
Yeah.
Because
I'd love to hear that. Just like a mic, like just have the guitarist mic'd up, like anyway, just you can hear the breathing just at the start of the thing, just like dun dun dun. I wonder if it's got me thinking actually in terms of the way that sort of classical instruments are used in pop music. I think the way that they're approached is by pop musicians, and like you hear it and you see it as well. Even on the keyboard that I have, you'll have violin, viola, cello, bass, but then you just have like GX strings as a voice. And so I think a lot of pop musicians, and you hear them say it all the time, like even on working on tracks, they say, "Oh, I need strings on this piece," and it's not like I need a violin, viola. It's like, I need strings.
You just need texture. It's just about
that's exactly it. And so like it provides more of a textural sort of thing, which is really really interesting. And also in terms of like sort of writing music as someone who writes sort of pop music, like I don't tend to think in terms of sort of like specific parts for all of the instruments in the same way as you sort of, at least, pop music in general doesn't seem to be written that way. And I'd be really interested to see that sort of flip. If pop music was written by classical musicians and every part had its own sort of, its own part to play as part of the whole, and it sort of, everything was a lot closer together. It'd be really interesting to hear that sort of music. And some of my favourite music to listen to, a lot of music in the 80s, Tears for Fears being a big one that we talked about on one of the other episodes. I was saying the reason I liked it so much was because there's so much music for your music when you listen to it, in that the keyboard has its own part, the bass has its own part, and they're not just, it's not just, for example, on the bass just playing like the root of every chord and moving around. It's like it has a part that moves and progresses it, and the keyboard's not just adding texture. And even the strings that are in some of the pieces, like there are pizzicato elements, there are bowed elements, and sort of like everything is very meticulously written so that it sticks out, and it's so much nicer to listen to because it gives, there's more listenability to it.
Even as players of those pieces, it's hard to engage in a piece where you're a bit part player and you don't add anything beyond this single emotion or this single mood.
I'm thinking canon indie. Like if you're the cellist in or
times 64.
Yeah, or there's also that piece Bolero by Ravel, where the viola part and through the entire piece is dun, dun.
I've played plenty of pieces like that.
And it's literally the entire piece, and there are these hilarious YouTube videos of these players just like they put the camera.
But the thing is, as long as you're still playing, you change even the pits itself. It changes the way you have different ways of playing the pits depending on what where you are in that piece. Whereas if you're only coming in and not playing at all for the rest of the piece, or of a piece of a song, it's different. So when you say for Tears for Fears or other bands or musicians who add parts for each instrument that has, to an extent, that's in a role within the piece, then even the players themselves can get engaged with it and change the way they play depending on the mood of that piece at that certain moment in time. So I think it can change the way the music sounds completely just by having more parts for each instrument that you want to include.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's like even this is really opened my eyes in terms of to continue to write and include stringed instruments specifically. I have a song that I've been writing recently that I've sent to you, actually, the one that I sent you with string parts on it. But like it really does open your eyes in terms of just the difference between just saying like I just need some texture here versus like actually writing a part for each instrument. Like they're so far apart, and I think for me at least, right, one of the biggest thrills I get out of writing music and sort of performing with other people is like having written a song that other people can sort of get into in one way or another. And so like, I mean, you're in my band anyway, Johnny's in my band. But like when I've written something and you can see other people sort of like having their parts and sort of getting excited about the parts that they've got to play, like it's so much more enjoyable to play with people like that, because then they know they've got their part and it's like, oh, they're enjoying playing.
There's something to enjoy about playing the music, right?
Yeah, exactly, as opposed to like, can you just play the root of every chord again, please? And you just see the disengagers going like, yeah, okay, fair enough, like,
I mean, I'm no composer, I'm terrible, but even just by helping out Leo in that piece that he's arranging.
Thank you so much. By the way.
I even from his sample that he provided, I realized that he included these parts with kind of chords and stuff he has thought about, and I realized I do have these influences where I feel like I should have different parts for different instruments and help integrate them into the piece in a more natural way than kind of block chords or block minims and kind of very kind of predictable kind of rhythms, etc. And I mean, you learn more about music yourself when you try to write it. But yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah, I guess it's not part of the classical music. Like, you are taught to compose small bits of music at various points. Like, or maybe like write something in the style of like Baroque or something.
Yeah.
Like Bach or something. But yeah, it's not like an integral part of it.
It's not even part of
you're much more interpreting music that it exists. Even I guess things written in the classical tradition nowadays, they're not going to be Baroque or classical. You know, they might have influences of them, but they're going to be like way weirder. Like the stuff that's coming out of like composition courses at Guildhall is like. Like our friend Bethany Graves talks about it. It's just hilarious, you know, because it's just like it's kind of crazy, you know, and they're trying to make it more forward thinking. Whereas if you're writing an acoustic pop track, you know, there's you just follow those conventions of the time.
Yeah, exactly.
It is weird that you don't learn any kind of composing to an extent,
unless you elect to do it. Unless you're like, oh, I really want to learn how to compose music. Then you do a composition course, I guess.
What as in if talking about kind of all these people who go to the Royal College or whatever's on the weekends, going during school, where they would have a whole day of learning chamber music. Even some people would elect doing conducting and solo stuff and orchestral stuff. But I've never heard of someone doing a composing course as part of their day. It's, even though that's obviously the crux of music, and someone has to create it in one way or another. Yeah,
it seems it is. I think it's a relatively new thing actually, because even in terms of sort of pop music, like having like composition courses doesn't really exist in the same way. You have songwriting courses for like writing lyrics and things, but it's not really like, you don't learn to like make a guitar part in a course in the same way, I don't think, or at least it's nothing that I've ever heard of, sort of like having an actual like guitar composition course. But I guess at the same time, like, it just seems to be kind of, at least with guitar, there's a much sort of like just throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks in terms of writing songs. Like,
yeah, I guess it comes from, I guess the reason why those pieces are written are different. So if you're writing an acoustic pop track now, just to use that example again, you're using it to sell the commodity of it now. You know, you're selling the recording of it. Whereas, I guess to overgeneralize about the past, you're like, a lot of these massive orchestral pieces are commissioned by like
a royal charter,
rich people, to put it
so
in very general terms.
You've already been paid, and then you're writing it afterwards, kind of thing.
Yeah, and then all these operas, they're commissioned to be performed by these like institutions, I guess, or rich people. I mean, it depends. I'm very much. I'm not. I need to read more about that stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, commissioning is just. I think a lot of time it just became part of it. I don't think these composers would only compose because they're commissioned to do it, as in they write their piece of music, and it's the way to make. That's the way to make a living. But in terms of I was going to say something, I just completely forgot. It was an interesting point that I had, and I just completely forgot.
I mean, I was going to continue off that and say, like, it would be weird if I like commissioned a piece of you, Leo. Like, can you piece? I mean, unless I commission you to write a original guitar tune for like a wedding or something, you know.
Yeah.
Then maybe that makes sense, but you know, it's
not
different context, I think.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say, I just remembered that you don't have anyone explicitly explaining why having certain notes or a certain way played in a certain way makes you feel certain emotions. Whereas, so in terms of your broad general classical music training, you kind of pick it up very subtly, as in, you know, why having kind of short staccatos make you feel so more agitated or more expectant, for example. But you're never explicitly told that, unless you have some great teachers who do that. I've had a few kind of teachers at school who have done that, but I've learned more about music in GCSE than just learning my violin, where you actually analyze different genres of music, different pieces of music, from classical to pop to African to Indian, where you understand why you feel certain emotions, because especially when you're breaking down Bernstein, for example, you know, what techniques makes you feel more expectant, or what makes you feel fear, what makes you feel kind of romantic and loving. Is if you have someone to explicitly explain that to you, I guess you have some kind of basis to work off. I mean, those techniques doesn't always have to evoke those feelings, but to have someone to help you explain why you're feeling what you're feeling, I think would definitely help.
No, I completely agree. I think it comes from convention as well, doesn't it? That, like, if you hear enough staccato notes in a context where something is agitating, for example, in a film score, you know, if you're running away from something, you've got these sort of, like, you know, it gives you that sense of urgency and sort of agitation. So it's definitely built on convention. But I think you have the same with I can't remember who it was, but and it was hundreds of years ago, but he came up with the mood for every single key of playing as well. So like C major, for example, like is like childish and innocent, and so, like, in terms of composing classically, like if you compose in C major, it's supposed to sound childish and sort of innocent. It has that versus like D minor, which is sort of like, it's like passionate warrior or something like that. They're really pretentious titles.
Supposedly the saddest key, right?
Yeah, exactly. Somehow. But it gives you that kind of, like, it does give you something to work off, because then if you are, you know, if you want to write something sad, then you have the key to choose from, and you go, okay, well, I want to write something sad, I'll go to D minor then, you know, as opposed.
But surely everyone benefits from having, I guess, group sessions where you analyze a piece of music and kind of you all work together to discuss why you feel a certain way, and everyone might feel different ways about the piece of music, and just hearing why they feel that can really develop you as a singer-songwriter for you, especially.
Yeah, definitely. Or even, and just as a musician in general as well, I think I've found, like, because I didn't have grade 3 music, and so I wasn't allowed to do GCSE music, but they let me do it.
Is that a prerequisite?
Yeah, for my school they said you had to have grade 3 in your chosen instrument, but then they let me do IB music with no grades, which made absolutely no sense. But, like,
it's an international board. So.
It's an international board, far more forward thinking.
Yeah.
But
they won't let me back into the UK, but they'll let me back in if I cross through France. And
yeah, exactly. But the studying of music, and we studied classical pieces. We only did 2. We did the Classical Symphony by Prokofiev, and the Yellow River Piano Concerto as well by multiple. And actually breaking them down was so much fun, because, like, you do get to sort of, you know, you have your own initial reaction, which obviously when you're sort of 16, 17, like, you know, you're sort of, I like that because it sounds nice, kind of, you know, like, but it gives you a vocabulary.
That's still my level of understanding of music. It's like I don't care what the lyrics are. It might be the most depressing lyrics. I'm like, the music sounds happy.
But like it gives you a vocabulary to sort of talk about music as well, and it sort of it deepens your enjoyment if you have things to listen out for, and if you know what you're listening for. Like, I guess it speaks to the whole sort of musical instinct that we talked about a while ago. Sort of like, if you know what to listen out for in a given genre of music, you can enjoy it a lot more, because you can understand that the person is doing whatever they're doing. You know, it's a choice and it's an intention. They're meant to do it, and they're meant to make you feel a certain way. So when you do it, it's almost like a little tick box, like, I got that. You know,
that's why I feel so
nice, good job. You know.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that I guess is across all music, but especially in classical music, there's, like, you don't have to play an instrument to be able to appreciate any type of music in a different way. You know, you can appreciate, like, there's this book I really want to read, absolutely on music. It's Seiji Ozawa, the Japanese conductor, talking with Murakami, the author, and they're talking about loads of, like, Beethoven and Bernstein and Brahms, apparently, according to the back. But I'm really interested just to see what his he loves classical music, so I guess it's a different perspective from someone who just doesn't play an instrument at all, doesn't understand notation. But like there's so many different perspectives to appreciate music and analyze it in a different way. Like you don't have to be like, oh, this is like a diminished B section that is adding tension and then it gets released when it comes back to the A section. Like you don't have to know that type of stuff to be able to appreciate that type of thing. Also, I'd like to mention that we've reached an hour and I'm quite enjoying this. I'm wondering, I don't know what your time constraints are, but we could just crack on. Thank you for listening to another episode of Sonic Bytes. We had such a great time chatting with Min that we actually went for another hour after the episode you just listened to. So stay tuned for part 2 of the exciting conversation coming very soon. If you like what you heard, follow us on Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts, and make sure to leave us a review. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and like and leave us a comment on the YouTube channel Leo Kelly G Music. See you soon.